They gave me the worst room in my own house. Not by accident, not out of carelessness, deliberately, with a smile, in front of everyone. And I wish I could tell you it was just petty family drama. It wasn't, because it wasn't only about humiliating me. It was about ownership. It was about control. And by the end of that weekend, I realized they weren't just disrespecting me, they were quietly trying to position my husband as the real owner of what I built. My name's Victoria. I'm 34. I work in graphic design, and I own a house called Pine Ridge, a house I bought when I was 27 with money I saved alone, a loan I signed alone, and a vision that belonged entirely to me. And I want you to tell you about the weekend that changed everything, not just about my marriage, about who I was willing to be. But first, you need to understand how I got there, because this story didn't start that weekend. It started the first time I met Eleanor. I met Marcus at a design conference 4 years ago. He was presenting something about architectural photography. I was there for a panel on branding, and we ended up at the same table at the dinner afterward. He was quiet in a way that felt intentional rather than shy. He listened before he spoke. He asked questions that showed he actually heard your answer to the last one. By the end of the evening, I had given him my number without him asking for it. That was a first for me. We dated for 8 months before I brought him to Pine Ridge, and I want you to understand why I waited that long. Pine Ridge wasn't just a house, it was proof. It was the physical evidence that I became who I promised myself I would become. I had talked about owning property since I was 19, working weekends at a coffee shop, watching older women come in with their laptops and their confidence, and thinking, I want that. I want to be the kind of person who builds something real. So I did. I saved for 3 years. I drove a car that cost $400 and broke down twice. I said no to vacations and concerts and dinners out and every version of spending money that felt good in the short term and meant nothing in the long one. Every single month, I moved money into an account and I did not touch it. I called it the house fund. I treated it like a religion. When I finally closed on Pine Ridge, I sat in the parking lot of the title company and cried for 20 minutes. Not because I was sad, because I had made something real out of something that had lived in my head for years. When I finally brought Marcus there, he walked through every room quietly. He ran his hand along the original woodwork in the hallway. He stood on the porch and looked out at the land and said, "You built this." Not, "You bought this." Not, "This is beautiful." He said, "You built this." And I fell in love with him that weekend. I should have paid more attention to what happened when I met his mother. Eleanor was 62 when I met her. She had been widowed young and raised Marcus and his sister Claire largely on her own, and she carried that history like a credential. It had made her formidable. It had also made her convinced that her love for her son was the most important force in any room she entered. The first lunch was at her house. She cooked for 3 hours. Everything was perfect. She was warm and funny, and she asked me questions about my work with what seemed like genuine interest. And then, right in the middle of dessert, she asked, "What do you plan to do when you have children?" I said I planned to keep working, that Marcus and I would figure out what made sense when the time came. She nodded, smiled. "Of course," she said. "Though Marcus has always needed a stable home, he works so hard, he'll need someone who can really be there." It was said gently, like advice, like concern, like a mother blessing her son's future. But I felt it. Something shifted, like a door that had been open was technically still open, but moved an inch in the direction of closed. She had tested something, and I had given the wrong answer. Over the next year, I watched Eleanor build her campaign the way you watch a weather pattern develop. Slowly, consistently, always with plausible deniability. She called Marcus every day, not always to say anything important, just to maintain the thread, to make sure that no matter what was happening in his life, her voice was the one in the background of it. When Marcus and I had our first real argument about something completely ordinary, Eleanor called that same evening. He mentioned it the next day like it was sweet. My mom called. She said she had a feeling something was wrong. He said it like it was proof of how close they were. I thought about the fact that he had told her that she had called because she sensed something, that her antennae were calibrated to detect any friction between us. I didn't say anything. I told myself I was being uncharitable. She came to our apartment once without calling first. We had been living together for 6 months. She knocked on a Tuesday evening when Marcus and I were cooking dinner, and she came in with a container of food and acted like this was the most natural thing in the world. She stayed for 2 hours. She was delightful. She helped with dishes. She hugged us both when she left. And then, Marcus told me the next morning, she called me on the drive home. She said she was worried about you. You seemed withdrawn. I had been tired. I had had a long week. I had been quieter than usual. That was the whole story. But Eleanor turned it into a file in her head, a data point, a reason. The comments continued in the way they always had, gentle, smiling, coded in something that looked like concern. Victoria, you look tired. Marcus needs you to be well. I know you love your work, but a marriage needs tending. You're so capable. I just hope you leave room for the softer things. Each one alone meant nothing. Together, they meant one thing. You are not what I want for my son, and I am waiting patiently for you to understand that. Marcus heard them differently. He heard care. He heard old-fashioned. He heard something I should tolerate. Every time I raised it, he said the same line. She loves you. She's just protective. Give her time. Give her time. As if her behavior was a phase, not a choice. That year, I learned something about Marcus that I wish I'd understood sooner. He didn't avoid conflict because he was weak. He avoided conflict because conflict with his mother cost him something he wasn't willing to pay. She had raised him alone. She had sacrificed for him. In his mind, that history was a debt he could never repay. So he repaid it by never challenging her. Even when challenging her would have meant protecting me. That knowledge settled into something I carried quietly. Then came the family gathering. Eleanor organized it every year, the whole extended family, a full production, and the house rotated each year. This year, she announced in the family group chat that it would be held at Marcus's country house. That's what she wrote. Marcus's country house. Marcus was sitting next to me on the couch when the message came through. I watched him read it, smile, send back a laughing emoji. He did not correct it. He did not say, "Actually, Mom, that's Victoria's house." He just laughed, and I understood something sharp. This wasn't new. He had let her believe that story for a long time, and he kept letting her believe it because it made him feel like a man who provided something he never built. He had used my house as a costume for his mother, and his mother had never known it was a costume. I could have corrected it right then. I didn't, because I had already made a different decision. I was going to watch. I was going to see how far it would go, and I was going to be there at the end of it with the truth in my hand. I packed the property deed into a folder. I put it in the outside pocket of my bag where I could get to it quickly. Marcus didn't ask what was in the folder. They arrived in the afternoon. Claire and her husband Brad came first. Brad was the kind of man who needed everyone in a room to understand his place in it. He got out of the car, looked at Pine Ridge, and said, "Marcus, man, look at this place. You really did it." Marcus smiled. "You know how it is. Work hard. Good things happen." I was standing 5 feet away. I said nothing, because I wanted to see the whole story. Eleanor arrived like she was returning to property she'd always owned. Sunglasses, despite the clouds, red lipstick at 3 in the afternoon, a large bag carried with the authority of someone who intends to stay a while. She stepped out of the car, looked up at Pine Ridge, and put her hand to her chest. "My son," she said, "what a blessing." Then she looked at me and said, "Victoria, you are a lucky woman." Lucky, not "you built something beautiful," not "you two have a wonderful home," just lucky. Like the house happened to me. From the moment Eleanor walked in, she ran Pine Ridge. Shoes here, children not upstairs, food on that counter, that light costs money. Victoria, we need more napkins. Victoria, where do you keep the good tablecloth? Victoria, turn that music down. And the part that will stay with me forever is this. Everyone obeyed. Automatically, as if Eleanor's confidence was enough to override the actual authority, which was mine. I breathed. I watched. I waited. Because I wasn't finished observing. On Saturday evening, Eleanor brought out a notebook. That detail matters because it means she prepared, she planned. She stood in the living room and announced she would be assigning the bedrooms as if she were running a hotel. Claire and Brad got the large room upstairs, the cousins got the rooms along the hall, the children got the room with the bunk beds. Then she paused. She looked at me with a smile carefully calibrated to look like generosity. Victoria, we'll put you in the little room near the back, the one by the storage area. It's quieter back there, more private. You're not one for fuss, are you? The storage room, the room where I kept tools and boxes and extra furniture. That room, in my own house. Claire said, "Oh, she'll be fine there. Victoria's easygoing." Brad said, "Yeah, she doesn't need anything fancy." And the conversation moved on like they hadn't just handed me the worst room in my own home in front of 40 people. I looked at Marcus. I waited for one word. Just one. "Mom, no, that's not right. Victoria, don't listen to that." Anything. He met my eyes for half a second, then looked away. "It's just for the weekend, babe. That room is actually really comfortable." Just for the weekend. My dignity was just for the weekend. My standing in my own home was just for the weekend. I picked up my pillow, I walked to the storage room, and I said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Perfect." I kept my back straight until the door closed behind me. Then I sat on the edge of the small bed and listened to the sounds of my house. Laughter from the kitchen, children running upstairs, the warmth of a home full of people who felt entirely at home. And I made a decision, not out of anger, out of something colder and cleaner than anger. If Marcus allows this, he doesn't think of this as our home. He thinks of it as a place he gets to live because I love him. And love without respect is not a partnership. It is a lease. Sunday was the big day. Eleanor planned the whole production, toast, dinner, photographs. She also assigned me a task. "Victoria, handle the porch decorations. You're so creative. This is your chance to really contribute." Contribute in my own home. I decorated the porch. String lights, candles in glass holders, flowers cut from the garden I planted. It was beautiful. Eleanor said lovely without looking at me. Then she directed where everyone should stand for photos. And then, during the toast, she tapped her glass. The porch went quiet. She said, "Thank you to my wonderful son, Marcus, for sharing his beautiful home with us this weekend. Marcus, you make me so proud." That was the third time since Friday, I had counted, but I still waited, because earlier that afternoon, passing the side porch, I had heard Brad talking to Marcus. Low voice. Not low enough. He said, "You need to get this property in your name, man. Seriously. You can't leave something like this exposed. If things ever go wrong between you, you walk away with nothing." Marcus laughed, nervous. "We'll get around to it." Brad said, "Your mom said the same thing. You need to be the one with the title. That's how it should be. These women today, they use what they have against you." I stood very still, because now I understood the full picture. This was not just Eleanor being overbearing. This was a plan discussed between multiple people to transfer my property into my husband's name. They saw Pine Ridge as something Marcus was entitled to, and they saw me as the administrative obstacle. I was not a person in their story. I was paperwork. When Eleanor made her toast, I stood up. The porch went quiet fast. Marcus looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Fear, and a desperate hope that I would say something pleasant and sit back down. I said, "I'd also like to say something, if that's all right." Eleanor's eyebrow moved a fraction. I said, "This weekend has been genuinely instructive for me. I've learned things I needed to know." I reached into my bag. I took out the folder, set it on the table, opened it slowly, placed the property deed face up where the nearest people could see it. And then I said, "Pine Ridge is not Marcus's house." Silence. Complete. I continued, "It has been in my name for 7 years. I purchased it before Marcus and I ever met. I saved for it alone. I signed for it alone. I have paid every property tax, every maintenance bill, every mortgage payment since the day I closed." Claire's face went white. Brad's jaw dropped. Eleanor stared at the deed like it had personally insulted her. "That's not possible," she said. She turned to Marcus. And this is the moment that mattered most. Eleanor genuinely didn't know. Real confusion, real shock, which meant Marcus had let her believe this story for years. He had smiled, he had nodded, he had played the role of provider, using my house to perform a version of himself that made his mother proud. And his mother had never known the performance was happening. I said, "I'm telling you this not to humiliate anyone." I looked around. "I'm telling you because this weekend I was given a storage room in the house I own. I was ordered around in my own kitchen. I was treated like a guest in my own life. And I allowed it because I needed to see something." I looked at Marcus. I needed to see whether my husband would choose me. Just once, just one word, the truth out loud to his family, that this is my house, that I am not here by his permission. The silence was so complete I could hear the candles. Eleanor started. "Victoria, I think—" "I'm not finished," I said. And she stopped. I said, "I also heard the conversation this afternoon about putting this property in Marcus's name, and I want to be very clear. That will not be happening. Not now, not ever. This house is mine. It was mine before this marriage, and the law is extremely clear what that means." Brad stood up. "Now wait a minute. Marcus is your husband." "Sit down," I said. He sat down. I don't know who was more surprised, him or me. I said, "Someone filmed the toast, so whatever version of this weekend gets told later, there is a record." The ruse shifted immediately. Phones got checked, eyes flicked to Claire. Eleanor stood up. Her warmth was gone. "You cannot speak to this family this way. I am her mother." I looked at her steadily. "And I am the owner of this property," I said, "which means you are a guest here, and guests leave when the host asks them to." No one moved, so I said, "Tomorrow morning, I'd like everyone on their way by 10. I put the deed back in the folder back in my bag, and I walked inside. That night, Marcus came to my bedroom, the master bedroom, which I walked into without asking anyone's permission, because it was mine. He stood in the doorway. He said, "Victoria, you humiliated my family." I looked at him for a long time. Then I said, "No, Marcus, you did that." He started to speak. I didn't let him. "You let your mother call this your house in front of everyone. You laughed. You let her give me a storage room, and you told me it's just for the weekend. You sat 3 feet away while your brother-in-law told you to take my property, and you said, 'We'll get around to it.' You have spent 2 years choosing not to tell the truth because the lie was more comfortable." His jaw tightened. He said, "I can change." I nodded. "Maybe," I said, "but I've spent 2 years waiting, and I'm done waiting." He asked, "So what does that mean?" I said, "It means you should sleep in the storage room tonight, so you know what it feels like." He stared. "I'm serious," I said. "The room is actually really comfortable. You said so yourself." He left the doorway. I closed the door. I lay in my bed, in my house, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Still. The way a room feels after a storm passes and the air finally clears. In the morning, they left. Eleanor didn't say goodbye. She walked to the car with her large bag and her sunglasses and never looked at me. Brad loaded the car without meeting my eyes. Claire whispered something to Marcus and got in. The cousins and aunts and uncles trickled out in confusion and discomfort, wise enough not to ask questions. Marcus was last. He stood on the porch and looked at me like a man trying to find language for something he didn't have language for yet. "I love you," he said. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know that too," I said. "Is this the end?" he asked. I looked at him for a long time. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I know this. I'm not living in a marriage where I have to fight to be seen in my own home. If you want to stay in this marriage, that has to change. Not in words, in choices. Real ones. Every time." He nodded. He left. I went inside. I made tea, lit the fireplace, sat on the sofa I chose, in the room I designed, in the house I built, and for the first time in longer than I could easily remember, I felt entirely and completely myself. There are things I want to say before this ends. Eleanor is not a cartoon villain. She is a woman who loved her son deeply and held a family together after a loss that would break many people. That history is real. But she made choices. She chose, again and again, to see me as a threat rather than a partner. She chose to build a narrative where her son was the provider and I was the lucky recipient. She chose to center herself in our marriage, and when the story wasn't working fast enough, she and Brad started quietly planning to put my property in Marcus's name. Those are choices, not instincts, not accidents. Marcus made choices too. He chose comfort over truth. He chose silence because it cost him nothing, and it cost me everything. He wasn't cruel, but he was a man who had never learned how to choose. And when you don't practice choosing, you default to whoever is loudest. I asked him to choose that weekend, and what he did, meeting my eyes and looking away while his mother assigned me the storage room, told me exactly where I stood in the order of things. I'm still figuring out what comes next. That story is still being written. But I know this. I did not lose my house. I did not lose my dignity. And I did not perform patience I didn't have just to keep the peace of people who were not keeping mine. So tell me the truth. Would you have spoken up the moment she called it his house in the group chat? Would you have stopped it when she handed you the storage room? Or would you have waited, like I did, until you had the deed in your hand and the whole family watching? I'll read you in the comments. And if this story hit you, if you've ever been told it was just business, while what they were really hiding was control, betrayal, or a double life, stay here. Like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to see the truth today. Because here, one story always leads to another.